okay, so what are our everyday average problems that we experience? And it may come into the seminar with that. But what I'm so excited about within the whole concept here is that those problems are just gifts in disguise. They're your superpowers that have just been viewed from a sense of, oh, I'm overwhelmed by the world versus what do I want to create as a worldview?
Right. I mean, it's the beauty of the challenge, right? I mean, nobody goes to a superhero movie to see the superhero sit around, be content, pleasant, and happy.
The obvious one for me seems to be when things seem like they really suck, that it actually is the training ground for our superpower.
That's a good place to start, actually.
Talking about the concept of we all have a superpower, how does that work exactly? What is a superpower that we all have, and what about the fact that we're fallible human beings that are constantly making mistakes, messing up, right?
I suspect the reason that right through a lot of the old societies, people said, we just don't see the world out there. We see the world through this grid of ideas and concepts and so on, a worldview or perspective, is to say, we are working with something. We are actively involved. It's not this world that we just have to put up with. So that when there's a challenge, we say, okay, now I'm overwhelmed. I was under the world before, scrunched by it. Now there's a challenge, it just got worse. When you're talking about superpowers, consciousness being a superpower, then it raises that immediate question about what you just said, Mike, the fallible human being. And that's the nice thing about working with it. So the engagement for the superpower is consciousness is a superpower. The open question is, I mean, people talk about consciousness all the time. The really cute thing is that nobody has any idea what we're talking about. It has something to do with the mind or awareness or whatever, and they go have dinner.
Perhaps discussing the difference between, one worldview versus another, one where this overwhelming experience that we have to deal with versus, well, if we're projecting, what's within out onto the world anyway, and that's what we're really seeing. Well, why not project something that we can work with?
Right. Much fun to project misery and defeat and failure and loss. I might want to come up with something different, just in case.
Yeah.
Well, the ancient cultures would have a different way of looking at it because they don't see themselves as separate. They see the world as a great song, and each person is woven into the great song, bringing their own melodies. So there can't be a mistake. It's more of following the melodies of the song and expressing, each person expresses who they are, that adds to and creates the great song.
Interestingly enough, as you talk about the song, there's this metaphor that I teach my students around connecting with the body and recognizing where the body is leading us in terms of sensation and emotion, right? And you can picture what I call the three vectors of awareness: breathing, movement, and sensation. That if you're playing a cello, imagine that your movement, the different tones that you can create by pressing different parts of the strings in the fretboard, like movement, different movements, and then your bow going across the strings to create that vibration so that you can express it, creating the music of sensation. So you have these three dimensions working together that as we just experience, okay, I'm moving, I'm breathing, and how do I know I'm moving and breathing? I sense my breathing, I sense my moving, and they dance with one another. And there's this intelligence that we can awaken within us. Our superpowers can connect, like our specific gifts, to how we feel our body's leading us in one direction or another. So what you're talking about is, the concept of ancient native cultures connecting to life as a song. We can practically do that in a mindfulness experience with movement and sensing our bodies.
That's a very good example of worldview and how you'd work with it too, because if you think of the difference between a song and say a battlefield, well, if my worldview has this dominant image of I'm in this battlefield, or I'm in this place where nothing changes, kind of like a movie. You went into a movie and all the actors just sitting on screen staring at you. You think, okay, why did I pay for this? Everything is just frozen. Nothing's happening. It's boring. So, and you had that. Either people think, oh my God, it's a battlefield, or wow, this is boring. Right? native peoples with the song idea. And then what you were saying, Mike, when the body moves, well, you'd have the song and the dance. You'd have this worldview that invites you to move. And so, as you know very well, almost all the ancient cultures had this form of ecstatic dance or movement. And so that's what people would have to work with. Say, okay, I can now work with these images myself, and then I can see what kind of movement goes along with those images. Because you can imagine a battlefield, and it's interesting that we just had, you know, an Academy Award about nomination about a battlefield. They just keep the camera going as the soldiers are moving.
Mm.
Yeah, if I had that image, my whole life is me running through a battlefield with nobody shuts the camera off, so I get a break.
Right. Yeah, and then as we move, you know, all of a sudden it's like, what's wrong? And when I sense this, oh, what does that mean? Right.
Yeah, yeah. And then if something bad happens on the battlefield, I just got shot. So I obviously lost the war, lost the battle. Whereas if it's a song and something's a challenge, that's just asking the song to, you know, we need to add another harmonic, or does the song need to go someplace else, and so on. And it invites, all of them invite movement of some sort or another.
And interesting, you mentioned ecstatic dance, because the technique that we'll be working with in this workshop, TRE, tension and trauma releasing exercises, utilizes a tremor mechanism, which our body naturally does to lower stress load. And it invites this state in our nervous system that's playful, that can engage in a song. And that's what the ancient native cultures were doing. It was a form of what we will be practicing in TRE, allowing the body to move as it's called. It's sort of a bottom-up experience of feeling and allowing the body to lead. And then from the top down, go, oh, what was this experience like? Mm-hmm. And we can merge the two together, and you can connect to your superpowers through that. Like that is, where do I feel the most alive?
Mm-hmm. What really, it says here, okay, I can work with the imagination. I can work with my intuition. Those images that we just talked about, that Tracy talked about with the song. Then I can get my intellect to figure out what it wants to do with all of this stuff. How do I strategize during my day and so on? And my body and my emotions get very engaged, and they're going to be engaged very differently. If this is this frozen world, the engagement looks a little bit like the deer in headlights. If it's a battlefield, it looks a little bit like ducking all the time and trying to get out of trouble. If it's a song, and it's getting into the body and moving, and
it's celebrating and play.
Yeah. Mm. And those are all possible movements. You know, university students used to say, well, it'd be nice if we all lived in that ideal world. You know, they just chose one of them, right? Here's the frozen one, here's the battlefield, here's the song. And they say, well, too bad we don't live in that. Actually, the whole point was, you don't live in a world, you live in a worldview. And you can choose one, and then then you're working with whatever's going on outside of you.
And in this process, connecting that worldview to all these different levels of intelligences that you were just describing essentially awakens your personal gift, your superpower, your ability to feel that and feel most alive.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons I'm so excited about teaching with the two of you, is that we can bring all of these things together with powerful tools from all ends.
Right. And then the nice thing too, that we've been talking about is, and why, you know, doing it with more than one teacher, is to say, to invite people to join the conversation and say, come on, what examples do you have? What are you running into in your life? Because then that also grounds it too. You know, with the unfortunate thing about comparative religions and philosophy in my background is that a lot of times we can have so much fun with the story and the idea that we forget that nobody has any idea what the hell I'm talking about. Excuse me, how does that relate exactly? And then you find out, you say to them, well, how does it relate? You know, how did that relate to you? And so getting that dialogue going with the group too, that's another fun thing. When you have a whole day workshop, you have a chance for people to really jump in, and you get lots of good contributions then too.
When we share different perspectives, we get a fuller, bigger picture of the world as it is, because we're bringing it.
So it has to be a hero's journey, or else, you know, it's not fun, right? What fun would that be?
Right.
And so for our own lives, you know, it's sort of saying the obvious here, but it's like, okay, we kind of forget that we're the hero in our own story, you know,
Yeah.
and connecting to that simple concept. I mean, to that worldview, I'm the hero in my own story. You know, that lightens things up. That creates energy. That creates a sense of, oh yeah, well, I have a beginning, a middle, an end, and what does that mean? You know?
And I think with the fact that the future is always this open field, it's always an open field of possibilities when we're working with our own worldviews, then working with people, even from this seminar and ongoing, it gives us a sense of what that then looks like in our everyday lives and in our culture and societies. And I think that that's really exciting to try to figure out, okay, where do we go from here? Because it's an open field.